Well, when I bring in all of my silver cases, everybody gets real intrigued, and the students too. Of course, the students, they say, what's in it? You know?
Yeah, open it.
And so, anyway, I'll just share a little bit with you about background. And you'll hear me reference this from time to time. And so I like to be transparent and upfront, let you know where I'm coming from with this. I was trained in chemistry, geology, biology, you know, and education. I've been in education right at 40 years, teaching science all that time, and other things as were required at the various schools I was at. And I've taught all the way from little ones all the way up to, you know, students working on doctorates and stuff like that. The biggest handle I have, people try to remember my name, Jerry Simmons, and the easiest thing that I have for them to remember is that I'm nicknamed Doc Rock. And so if you come to Haviland from time to time and you're trying to find where we are, of course now it's obvious the big elephant that we have out there, big mammoth. Anyway, you may come and you ask, where is Jerry Simmons in that museum? And they say, who? In the museum they might pick up. Well, you mentioned Doc Rock. Oh, Doc Rock. All right. And so I taught in the public school there. I taught at Barclay College as a professor in math and science for years and education. And so anyway, Doc Rock has become the trade word down there. It's easier to remember for the students. Okay? Well, what I'm about to show you here, and you were talking about collections, Laura, I am assuming, collections. Raised on a farm and a ranch, raised with a father who went through the Depression, and every little piece of string that was longer than a foot was kept. Every little box eventually would have its place, and every little screw was in its place in the right drawer. All right, having gone through Depression, I learned how to classify and put things in order. What it also taught, the side part of that was, it taught me to be a collector, an organized collector. So my love of the ranch and farm life there in New Mexico, where I was raised, all right, allowed me the freedom to just roam, explore, learn, work hard, plow, you name it, watch things grow, work with the cattle, get your toes stomped, and whatever else I learned. But it all gave me ample opportunity to go out and collect things. And one of my favorite things, two of my favorite things were old antique or old farmsteads or ranch sites, or old ghost towns as they'd call it. Because I love to find the implements, the old implements, the rocks that I would find. Anything else that was intriguing to me, I would collect and bring in. I'm sure much to my mom's, she'd have to clean out my pockets every time and everything. And eventually, one thing I might add, people ask me all the time, say, well, how'd you get the name Doc Rock and how long have you been collecting rocks? Well, the Doc Rock thing came about by a little TV show that I did with kids, had them on, talk show. And we'd go on and do things, a science class that was broadcast, and the name became Doc Rock. That was a handle they gave me, and it took off from that. But as far as collecting rocks, which is probably the #1 collection that I have and my expertise in all of that area, I said, I don't know exactly when I started collecting. Now, some of you are going to be saying, I've been there. I know, as I talk about this. And I say, I don't know for sure, but I remember that my dad's tactic for discipline in the appropriate place, and he used his discipline very wisely, very accurately, and I remember it changed from his hand to a little switch. That stung, so you remember it, all right? And so finally, years later, I got bold enough, my memory was such, I finally got bold enough to ask him, said, Dad, why'd you change? And he looked at me and said, Jerry, I got tired of hurting my hands on the rocks that were always in your pockets. Pretty little picking up rocks, pretty rocks. Well, out of that, there's a testimony that comes out of this, and I'll have a testimony sheet to kind of give you where I came from. My dad, all right, and I'm just sharing this as my story. My dad was a good dad, awesome dad. Mom, both of them, ranch life, wouldn't trade it in for anything. All right, the experience was great for being a science teacher. It was absolutely the best training I could get. Being out there working with the plants, working with the cattle, working with the soil, working with the rocks, you name it. I did it. And it piqued my interest. But one thing that was very missing in our family was the idea of spiritual things. Because my dad was very bitter. He was angry at the church. So it was never brought up. So at the best, I was going to be raised agnostic. As an agnostic. And I would get deeply involved with all of the science and everything, biology and that aspect of it, education, and I would be being trained as an atheist as well. Atheist meaning is still a religious belief. If people don't think it is, but it is. No God or yes God. That says there's two choices. They're both religious. They're both faith-based. Well, that picture was not in on my plate. And so as I got involved with all the heavy science and education, you know, and I just began to think, you know, all I'm getting is lots of knowledge here. But nothing is getting serious down here. It's avoided. You know, and I was familiar with that, with my dad. But I said, you know, as I'm walking out in nature, I'd walk the fences, I'd go out and do all kinds of things in the forest. We were about 7,000 feet there in central New Mexico, northeast of Albuquerque and southwest of Santa Fe, in between them. Beautiful little microcosm, about 7,000 feet, mountains around us up to 8, 9, 10,000 feet. Beautiful setting, all right? And I would be out in the forest quite frequently. And as usual, as I'm out in the forest, I would be seeing things that were just really attractive to me. I said, this is amazing. And I remember one particular day, all right, I must have been about a senior, about to graduate from high school. And you know, you start thinking a little bit, that at least the boys do, I don't know, we guys, because we're going to be separated. It means career time has now come. And I remember on one of those trips, and I call it my brow of the hill experience, I went out in the forest, and I remember going to this place, and I was so familiar with the whole area, looking for arrowheads, looking for, you know, pretty rocks and stuff like that. And as I'm walking in the forest, and I came to this beautiful, majestic pine tree. Had a red bark with kind of the black serpentine cracks in it and everything. And it was a big one, and I always like to stop and look at that and go up and smell it, and smell the trees, all right? Get the full sensation on the sciences of our senses with that. And as I did that, I noticed, I looked off to my right, and here's another type of pine tree, not the ponderosa type, of pinon pine, which is a smaller tree with the little pinon nuts, okay, which I used to collect and sell, all right? Roast, and you know, and they were great, the little pinon nuts. And I looked next to that, I saw that tree and looked at this big tree, and underneath that little tree, there was a pastel, and the only way I can describe it, it looked like a tulip, a pastel, light purple, bluish purple tulip, real light, but it was kind of fuzzy. And I thought, I have never seen that plant before. In all of my walking around out here, and I've never seen that. Well, while I'm there and I'm looking at that little flower and examining it and looking at the pinon pine tree and then the big ponderosa, I heard a noise off to my right. And so I looked to the right, and it was one of those moments in nature that just really make you think. I looked, and about from here out to the street, was a big buck, a mule deer. And he was checking me out, just looking at me, seeing what I was doing. So I just was quietly standing there, looking at the two trees, these beautiful little flowers, and that buck. And then thinking of myself, and then looking at the mountain scenery behind me. And suddenly, I started having serious thinking. This could not possibly evolve or come about by chance in trillions of years. Everything is a system showing engineering, it's working together. There's purpose. And it really, really challenged me because I was being trained the other way. All right, that's would have been high school. I was in the earth sciences and stuff like that. All right, before I got into college. And so I just really, that really impressed me. All right, as I think about the beauty, the purpose, the design, the engineering, the systems working together, and then me being in the middle of that and thinking about that. Well, that pretty soon I couldn't stay there all day, so I began to move and the deer ambled off, the big buck. And I went on about my business, but that little flower struck me because I'd never seen it before. And so I went back about 2 weeks later, found that same spot, and there happened to be 3 or 4 of those little flowers, and I took one. And I noted carefully how it was oriented in the light with that tree, so when I took it to my house or close to my house, I could put it in a very similar setting. And a very interesting thing began to surface, not about the plant, but just about my knowledge about it. It so intrigued me that I began to question, what's the name of this plant? What's the name of this flower? Why haven't I ever seen it? So I began to research it, and I found out it was called the passion flower. Because it's the first plant to come out and to begin to sprout in the higher mountains, after the winter cold and snow. And so it's one of the first ones to show. And so then I began to say, and I talked to a person a little bit later, was sharing my story, and this was years later. I asked them a question, and they taught Latin. And I mentioned the name of this flower, all right, in the science term, Pulsatilla patens. And she looked at me and said, that's an interesting word. She says, that means suffering on the cross. And I said, you're kidding. I said, this had to be a Spanish name, where they're naming it. And the intriguing thing was, just about every Easter time, that little flower would begin to bloom. Just a coincidence? Yeah. But sometimes we miss the significance of what's around us. There's meaning. Well, being raised and everything and going, and I'll be heading towards this and picking up all of these rocks and everything, and I'm in college, and like I say, at that point, I got to the point to where I just said, all they're feeding is up here. I'm not getting anything. There's more meaning to life in this. And it was that point that I gave my life to Christ. Being an agnostic and atheist, even though I knew when I go home, my first adversary would be my dad, my foe. But I knew, I said, and so I had an incredible experience where I met my Creator, our Creator. There was no question. And when my friends and colleagues around me who were being trained like I was, they'd come to me and challenge, well, isn't this kind of new that you now got religion? Boy, did I ever hear that a lot. And he said, now then, this idea of a creator and versus, the things, everything just by chance, we're proving that and everything. And I would look at him and I say, and it became so solid to me after that experience with the Lord and putting my farm and ranch experience together with it and that brow of the hill experience that I had. I realized. And I would tell them, I was raised on a farm and a ranch. I said there was always a question that I had of how could this just orchestrate itself without somebody, an engineer, orchestrating that information. And I said, so my real response to you is this, it's not any different. I said, for me, it was, I thought so. I thought so. I met the Creator. And I began to understand some things I'd never understood before, deep things. And life took on a powerful meaning. Well, anyway, I go home. And I'm done with my chemistry degrees. I'm done with all of that. All right. Had gathered up a wife along the way. It's been now 50 years. We celebrate our 50th anniversary this year. And what a journey. It hasn't always been easy. We know that. But it's a lot rougher if we don't know our Creator. A lot rougher. And I saw that in my dad. And so when I got ready to leave, I was offered positions in Cambridge and various other schools, and some back east, Yale, Dartmouth. And I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I really got the strong impression started having a heavy burden for my father, for my dad. Heavy burden. My wife would tell you, at night sometimes I'd begin to cry about it. Compassion was just beginning to just come into me. It's so strong because I so appreciated him. And his strength he built into me, and what I saw in this small man whose favorite sport was boxing and his favorite topic in school was debating. That tells you what I was getting ready to get into. And as I went home, and I just really felt inside, go to your dad. So I went to my dad. And I knew there would be those times when he would come, and he was ready to shadow box, as you'd call it, debate. And he would come up and he'd pose a question, and I could tell that was the first punch.
Oh, goodness.
Well, how are you going to respond to that? And I just really felt inside, I could argue, but I said, arguing does very little. And I just felt the impression inside of me, love him, don't argue. Love him, don't argue. Respect him, appreciate him. So I did that, and I would acknowledge what he did respectfully, and then I would just back out of it. And then I knew that there would be other round 2, round 3, however many rounds, there would be a time. And there came one time, all right, since my knowledge of the scriptures, of the Bible, what most of us know about, was that it was nothing. And I really had a sense that I was going to be, and I was getting this, already beginning a sense within me, I was going to be working with lots of young people. And I said, me, an old farm country dude like me, pumpkin, bumpkin, pickle on a, wart on a pickle, whatever. All I'm used to is cows and stuff like that and a little school stuff and going into the classroom and teaching kids. That wasn't in my mind, but yet I kept getting that impression. And along with that, it was going to say, you're going to be teaching and you're going to need some Bible training. Well, that I had that much of too. So I just said, okay, and when there's something in your mind, you just can't get it off of it. Sometimes you need to follow through on something. Your mind just won't be at rest until you've done that. So anyway, I'm home, and my wife and I are there temporarily for a period of time, helping my dad. And these little bantering times will come up, little boxing matches, a question they have, and I do that thing, I just acknowledge it and just say, yeah, Dad, that's probably true, and just let it go at that. And I remember one time leaning over the back of my pickup, all right, my little Toyota pickup that I had, and I'd put a bumper sticker on the back of that thing. Now, all that I'm telling you is leading up to all of this and just bringing all of it together like a big piece of puzzle, amazing puzzle. And that's all of us. We're part of this puzzle. And as we go into our senior years, even more so, we think about that. My time is short. What about life? Hobbies are awesome. Collecting is awesome. Good way for energy and giving service and doing things like this. Well, anyway, I met my pickup. And there's this bumper sticker, and the bumper sticker said, Jesus is your best shock absorber. And that's all I put. And I'm leaning over in the pickup, and I saw my dad coming, and I could see the ready to come. So he comes up to me, at the back of the pickup, looks at the bumper sticker, he points at it, he says, Jerry, do you know what they call people who put these on their vehicles? Well, I wasn't sure what he was referring to, and I'm going to date myself in probably the time that most of you would figure it out pretty quick, roughly the time frame in this. And I said, well, Dad, he says, well, they call them Jesus freaks. There's the key word. And he looked me square in the eyes and said that. And so I was ready to just absorb that punch, that first punch, do what I felt in my heart I'd always been doing, but this time I felt something strange inside that says, now I'm going to throw my punch. And so I just quickly braced myself and just waited for kind of, and I call it the Lord, kind of put the words in my mind and in my mouth of what to say in this tense situation. And so I looked at Dad square in the eyes and respectful and said, Dad, and I pointed not to him, but I started doing this. I said, I know they call them Jesus freaks, but I know what Jesus has done in my heart. That's how powerful it had become. And at that, instead of arguing and getting ready for his rebuttal and debate rebuttal, he turns around and he walks away. A week and a half later, the church that my wife and I and my mom had started attending church, they were having a revival of an evening. Monday night, Dad came. And I was so happy that he was there. I was just happy that he'd come to church. This first time in the whole family's life that he'd come to church with any of us. And so I'm just sitting there happy sitting with my wife next to me in the pew. And a friend of mine at the end of the service, of course, a revival evangelist usually gives an appeal to the people. If you need help, come forward. We'll pray with you for one reason or whatever. And he'd given that. And a friend who was between my age and my dad's age came up to me, slid in next to me on the pew and says, Jerry, do you think we ought to go talk to your dad? And I thought, Dad will let you as close as he wants you to. I've learned to respect that. But again, I felt something inside saying, see, now I'm not going by this anymore. I'm having to go by this, which is what I was seeking in the first part. You know, putting these two together. And I felt that again, and so I said, okay. So I got out of my pew, walked back. My dad was 2 pews behind me, and Mom. I slid in on the pew, and we're standing, and I didn't look at him in the face, did not want to intimidate him whatsoever. I said, Dad, wouldn't you go forward? If just for the family's sake? He ducked his head in a real gruff voice, says, forget it. So that was I'd thrown a punch, what had happened here, and he's saying, come. So I backed off. I went back to my chair, sat back to the pew with Linda, my wife. He came the next night, And ladies and gentlemen, the rest is history. He walked forward at the end, and he did something that made me cry, really cry. And I looked at my wife and I said, now I know my Jesus has come to live in my dad. Because one of the two things he taught us boys in my family. Men don't cry, it's weakness. And men settle things not with a gun. A man who has to depend on a gun is weak. He says, this is how you settle it. That's my dad. And I always wondered why he always had 2 pairs of boxing gloves around the house. And I still remember those red boxing gloves. I wish I still had kept them, because they represent a lot. But when he was up there and he was talking to one of the elders or deacons or whatever, I saw him do something that really, really, really touched me. He took out, he always had one of those blue bandana type handkerchiefs, never a red one, he was never showy or anything, but he had blue. And he took it and he started doing this. At that, I began to cry. And I told my wife, Jesus has come to live in my dad. Dad would live about 10 more years. He died of emphysema, not from being a smoker, but from cattle spray. He would only wear that bandana thing and it wasn't enough, and it was pickling his lungs. And he didn't know it. And my mom told me, says, Jerry, and my daughter and I were the last 2 to see him before he passed on. And my mom called me after he passed. She said, Jerry, I wish you'd have been here to see what happened. And boy, it told me the reality of 2 things, of being obedient, to listen to the Lord, to reaching out, and also the reality of the spiritual walk. Anyway, Mom shared that she could tell it was getting close, that his lung capacity was about 0 for oxygen, breathing. And he was sitting on a couch. He brought up 2 pillows next to him to raise himself up on the couch. And then all of a sudden she said, Jerry, the most incredible thing started happening. Said he raised his hands and this huge smile came all over his face, and just like he lit up. And instead of looking at a door, he's looking at the corner of a room, and she says, I am convinced he was seeing angels come to take him. And with that, he just slumped down and he was gone.
For goodness sake.
Thank you, Dad. And so he had a love for the rocks too, and for the things like this and the history. He loved history. His dad was a teacher, taught 8 grades, all right, in one classroom. So that education element had been kind of going on, that gene, if you want to call it that. And I guess I inherited it. And Grandpa liked history, and he loved to tell stories. So I guess I picked that up too. All right? So thank you, Grandpa. And so I have been able to minister at the funerals of my dad, my uncle, my mom, my grandpa, because I enjoy doing that. It's a sad moment, but it's a moment for us all to come together and care and work together. So anyway, enough of that. Let me show you some stuff real quick. All right? Story's over, although every rock has a story. What you have here is a series of rocks I take into schools and I talk to kids all the time. This is the material that was speaking to me, and I tell people, preaching at me all the time when I was still being trained agnostically and atheistically. These were speaking to me loudly about design and structure and beauty. And so as I began to work, and I want to see this one, I'll start with this one. It says color. So I will turn this around, and some of you say, oh, I've seen some of that. Or some of you say, yeah, my son or daughter sure got into some of that too. And kids will always tell me, why have you got them all wrapped up? I says, because I keep the value. I said, what you're seeing here in these, at least these first 3 cases, is about 10 grand worth of pretty minerals. They call them pretty rocks. And so as I begin to bring these out, I'll bring things out and I'll show them things. I says, now I go and I buy, I find, my son's a geologist, I'm a geologist, and I find the things like this. All right, this one I salvaged from a guy who was cutting it to make it into jewelry. That's tigerite. All right, and some of you may remember that. And by the way, if you need a sample of tigerite or some rock, I've got little polished rocks for you. You can take home as a memento of what we're learning today. All right, and some other things. So anyway, all of those things, and then there's all kinds of things, and we're all familiar with this. We know that metal. We've seen it before. Pennies, right? And that's native copper, natural copper from Michigan in its host rock, which is usually a calcite or carbonate type rock. But that's a nugget of native copper. And when I take this into the classroom, most kids have not in touch with where this stuff comes from. So I really try to get them feet on the ground of understanding. All right? And so I go on and I have all kinds of things in here. Let's see what I've got here. All right, and so I start bringing out and I'll ask kids, what's your favorite color? And so I'll bring out various colors. There's a pretty turquoisey blue.
Wow.
Again, many of these I've mined myself, or my son and I do that. Going out and doing it.
What was that stone?
That was a chrysocolla, all right? And it wasn't turquoise.
Okay.
Okay, the turquoise itself is a phosphate type mineral. That one is a silica copper type mineral and all. Now, here's another one a lot of people think it's pain. This is malachite, and that's a copper carbonate. I mined that one, and if you can imagine, I had a rock that was twice the size of this table, and it was so blooming hard, it was big, and that's all I could get off of it. Okay, but that's malachite copper carbonate, all right, mineral. And so you can imagine all the kids, I say, they may be sitting way in the back when I'm talking to them. Before long, that's just like a migration, moving up this way. And sometimes I'll hand them something, and boy, they're all right there, you know. And I don't care about the age. Even the little ones will start moving, migrating forward, looking at this stuff. All right, well, I said, then you've got people like purples, and this is a mineral from Tennessee. The black is a zinc mineral, which we process for the zinc metal, which is an important metal to it, and the purple are called fluorite crystals. And those fluorite are what we get fluoride for toothpaste. And explosives, it's a flux used for flux for various things too, in welding and heat processes. And so I show them all that, and pretty soon they're getting the idea. Well, this is pretty amazing and everything. And so I keep bringing out stuff. Here's another green. You can see that one was getting ready to be a jewelry piece. And that's malachite. Again, this one's from Africa. The other one was from Arizona. Again, copper mineralization. And so I keep pulling stuff. And so I said, everybody likes green, but most people, they like blue too. So I said, how about a blue? Next to that green rock was another rock that had this all over it. This is a copper carbonate mineral, a little richer in copper, called azurite. You'll see a lot of this in jewelry, the pretty blues. It's either lapis lazuli or it'll be azurite. Lapis is harder, so it's a better stone for jewelry. Azurite is a little soft, so you have to protect it. And so I have all of these real pretty minerals that I work with, and I show the kids all of this. And let me see here. Pick certain ones here as I move on. Okay, and here's another one here. And I said, you know, it's not a real attractive mineral, but brown like this. I said, what would you take that home with you? I asked the kids, if you found some of that, would you take it home with you? Yes! You can just hear it resounding as they talk about it, you know, the beauty of it. And as somebody said, wow, I said, do you understand what that word wow is? Wow is short for wonderful. Do we realize that's a worship word? Who do we attribute our worship to? Do we worship nature? Or the Creator, whose laws of physics and chemistry orchestrated all this, the beauty? And so I really talked to the kids about this. I said, this is reality as I begin to think about it myself deeply. about what I saw, the engineering. And thinking about all of us, and I challenge them, think about yourself. This is nothing compared to you. Nothing. I can collect this stuff, and you can't. Now, I'm not going to go around and collect people, but anyway, you know, the beauty, we're awesomely made. And so there's that, and I continue to bring out, and this is called kind of my color suite here of material that I have. And I'll just pick certain ones, and then I'll go into the other, some other cases here. And then, of course, there's always the pinks. Now, the coloring agents in all these is the metal. Copper for the blues and the greens. The pinks is lithium that comes in here. Lithium, the metal lithium. And then it combines with other things and forms these beautiful things. Can you imagine a room this size? I walked into a room about this size and the walls were about half again as high. And that's what the whole walls look like. Talk about a movie camera. This is underground. And I've been as deep as 2,000 feet underground and finding big blue and purple crystals, squares like this. Whoa, even under the ground. And those were big salt crystals down in Carlsbad, not up here at Stratica. You know. Okay, well, I'm going to dump that one for the moment, and let me go to this one real quick and pull a few of those. Now, I hope you grasp the real theme behind this and what's going on inside of me is I'm seeing this stuff, and I tell my people they were preaching at me. And I finally recognized it and met the Creator through all of this. Wow. All right, well, what about this? Now this one is entitled Shape. Now some of you may have been. How many of you have been in Oklahoma City, Norman, Oklahoma area? Okay, you know about it then. These are crystals. This is Oklahoma state mineral, the barite rose. Norman, Oklahoma. And it's just in the soil. Let me turn this around so it's easier for me to do that. So it's just in the soil. Let's see what this one is. Well, you've all heard of fool's gold. Gold is too yellow for this. This is iron pyrite.
Oh, beautiful. Wow.
Now, a reminder, these are coming from underground. They're all natural. This is fool's gold crystals in a pyramidal shape, pyramid shape. It gets more spectacular than this. And the kids are just going to say, and everybody says, who cut that? Who cut that? Particularly when I come to the next ones, when I get to them here. All right, let me see. How about things like this? How many of you, and most everybody's had to go through this state, Arkansas? Been to Arkansas before? I love to take kids and families on trips like this where we collect these.
Beautiful. How beautiful.
Laws of physics. How do you have it happen just by chance? Laws. You don't. You have to have a giver of law of that information. That's the logic and the reality. Those are quartz crystals, clusters. I dug that out of a pocket in Arkansas, in the Little Rock area, west of it, Hot Springs. And I take students with me, and they love to sign up for these things and go out and we dig stuff like this and have a really good time doing that. Well, I have two more of those, and then I'm going to go to kind of some spectacular ones there. Here's one here that I dug myself. That's a big smoky quartz crystal, six-sided, even the top is six-sided. So the geometry and math is so amazing that we in geology and particular crystallography, that's how we classify minerals according to their crystal shape. Cubic, hexagonal. All right, there's other shapes and we put them in those groups. There's 6 major groups. And even the geologists who don't want to consider the spiritual things have to say, well, it's almost magical. Yeah, magical. I said, that sounds kind of religious, doesn't it? and I don't like to admit that. Well, we have them in clear too. This one's from New Mexico. I dug this one. This one I got as an analog to this one. The clear one, this one's from Peru in South America. Very common. The most common mineral in the earth is this one right here. So Arkansas is loaded with that stuff. Okay. And so it doesn't take long. The kids are really, there. And usually I have it. If you want one of these, I brought one of these too. If you just have to have one, I brought one for you. All right, if you need that. Okay. So I put those up, and now then I go to the ones that everybody just says, no, surely not. I make sure I get it right here. Oh, by the way, this one's pretty big. So here's a big quartz crystal that's got 2 ends to it.
Wow.
Called double terminate. That's natural.
Wow.
I don't have anything here man-made. Nothing. Okay? And so that's a double terminated quartz crystal.
What's the most common mineral? Is that quartz?
Quartz.
Okay.
Yes, yes it is. It's the most common mineral. All right, how about this?
Holy mother.
Wow.
Same response every time. Kids, young, old. Who cut that? I said, I just smile at them. I said, I've dug them. You found them that way? Yes. And I even have some signs from, but that had to be cut because there's no such thing as a right angle, 90-degree angle in nature. And I said, you don't know your rocks, do you? That's a fool's gold crystal. Wow. And people say, oh, surely not. That's just too hard to believe. So I invested in one many years ago like this to kind of talk to them. This you will see the crystal in the natural rock.
Oh my.
Wow. Gee.
Can you see what I'm saying when I'm saying these things were preaching at me? As I would collect and put them in my pocket, it was so obvious all around me that engineering was all around me. So guess what? All of my sons-in-law and sons are all what? Engineers. And so anyway, that's right. Well, it gets better than that. Anyone been to the Smithsonian? Okay, some have been to the Smithsonian. Well, they have one up there like this one. And I wrap these up carefully. Because like I say, I like to keep them going as long as possible. How about this? They have one that has 7 of these together.
Oh my goodness.
Now I'm just giving you a sample of some of the things that are down in our museum. I've got a whole showcase of these that I've collected or traded for over the years. That's fool's gold. These particular ones come from Spain because it's a classic location for this happening. Now I've dug them myself. And Spain would be one place I'd love to go and just give me an hour, and I've seen walls of it that have these stuck in the walls. I said, just give me an hour. Collect them. But that's natural. Iron pyrite is the geology term, and it is a cubic system. All right, it is a square system. Well, I'll move on to another one here. And so I put that back up here, wrap him back up. And I go to a few little fossils. Again, just quickly going through some things we have at the museum. Not long ago, matter of fact, in December of this past year, December 19th, I and a young married couple, were out in a quarry, and we ran across a mammoth bone. And I suspicion there were pieces of things. And Kansas is more and more finding mammoth, the big elephants, all right? And it got to be such a big deal that it ended up in the Pratt paper. KSN 3 or whatever it is in Wichita came and did a special on what we were finding in the museum. And so all kinds of little things started happening. And what we found was the lower leg lower leg of a mammoth called the tibia bone. But what I have here came from the ranch, and again, here's where things were speaking to me. I remember in high school coming to my dad, asking him for help on having a science fair project in my science class. And he thought for a moment, and he says, let's go down to one of the old barns. He called it the old granary. And so we went in there, and he brings out this old chest that had a handcrafted hasp on it, clamp, and you could tell it was old. And he says, your great uncle found this in the 1930s after a flood. And it's been sitting down there ever since in this box. And when he opened this up, I just said, whoa, this is one mammoth tooth.
Oh my goodness.
Figured it was a tooth.
This is a mammoth tooth. Each one of these is called a plate, and you can see the dentine still on it. I was keeping it from breaking any more, treating it, but that's the molar surface. This is the roots. In their lifetime, a mammoth, and we've got all kinds of stuff like this down there, so bring family, bring the kids down to see this stuff, and we're finding more, you know. And anyway, the mastodon is a little different, a type of elephant, but a little different tooth structure. They're real easy to tell once you see the teeth, but that's the molar crushing surface. In their lifetime, they'll have between 4 to 6 sets of these. They're continuously elevating out, just like their tusk continues to grow, which is just a big incisor tooth that continues to grow. All right, well, their teeth do too, because they're having to eat 500 plus pounds of food every day. That's going to wear on your teeth. And so that is a molar surface. This came off of our ranch, and that became my science fair project. Dad was right on. And he knew where the stuff was, even though it had been sitting there. And this would have been in the 1960s, 30 years sitting in the dark in a box there in our old granary building. Just waiting for Sonny Boy to come along and spark the interest. So that's a mammoth tooth. Now what we've been finding is amazing. I've got a hip of a mammoth as well, parts of teeth, all right, and I've been to other places in quarries and various places around the state, and they're finding the stuff too. And one of the things that always comes up is, what about the human element? And so we have a display in there too where we talk about the natives in this country. And it's not the natives that you think of, because we're finding in history now that the Native Americans we know of were only one of maybe 3 or 4 other groups that were in here, and some of them were before they were. And to bring down a big elephant, you're not going to shoot them with a bow and arrow. That is called a spear thrower. It has like a crochet hook type thing that hooks in the back here, and then you hold it separate to the others, and then you fling it like that. And the speed of this thing with the dynamics of this point, 120 miles an hour. Far more effective at bringing down bigger animals than a little bow and arrow. The only reason we went to the bow and arrow is basically because all of the big game was gone. You don't need this with little animals. Matter of fact, some people have tried it, and that thing will go right through them because of the speed and force you put in. It's physics principle leverage. That leverage. You put a lever in there, and man, you can multiply your force. It's called mechanical advantage in physical science. You multiply your force X number of times. And that's called the addle. You know where that came from, that technology came from? 2 sources. And now it's just surfacing in our country where these came from. The Mayas and the Aztecs in Central America. And you go to St. Louis, and most have been to St. Louis at one time. East, there's a little town called Cahokia Mounds. It's not a mount. When you walk into that, it's a misnomer. I think they're trying to cover up something. I always suspicion some of my colleagues of what they're trying to do. All right, to avoid the obvious. But Cahokia Mounds, and you can pull it up on the internet, awesome place to go see the museum. On the east side of St. Louis and the Illinois side, Collinsville is where it is, the town. You walk in there, you drive in there, and the first thing you see is this 14-acre pyramid, 3 levels. And I said, that's not a mound. What are you talking about? And everything else. And they had a very sophisticated society, up to 20 to 30,000 people there on the Mississippi. They were doing culture. They had copper implements, they had all kinds of things. And then they just suddenly disband. And so we talk about that and how that entered into the picture, and with the mammoths and stuff, and the migration and the movement of people, all right, in this country prior to the Native Americans we know of today. And even some of the Native American literature that I've read talks about that there were three main groups of Indians fairly early on: the Algonquian Federation, the Sioux, and the Salish to the northwest. But they said they kept running into all three of these native, we'd call native groups, kept running into a fourth group, and they described them as mean-spirited. Nobody could get along with them. They were bigger than they were, and some of them were red-headed. And I'm immediately thinking, Vikings. And you think about that. But other than Vikings, it just says there was a northern group, obviously, that was in here too. And I think they were your big mammoth hunters. They were following the herds. And that's now being shown. All right, last thing here that I want to share with you is an ugly rock. But it's got red in here, and I'm sure I want to polish this down, and we have lapidary equipment and things like that people come down and grind their own rock, find their own rock, do things with it. This is out of Utah. And here's the story, the history. A fella came in, and he had pieces of rock that he cut and polished, and he made it into a bolo tie, Western style. And a fellow who was into geology looked at that and was really intrigued by it. He says, "Can I see your bow tie?" And the guy says, "Yeah." And so he takes it off and hands it to him, and the geology guy pulls out what he calls his loop, all right, his little glass, and says, and he asks the guy, he says, "Do you happen to have just a fragment or a sample of this that I could have and analyze this?" He says, "I've got a suspicion about it. I'm not sure, but I've got a suspicion." And the guy says, "Yeah, sure." And he says, "I'll let you know, I'm not sure." So the fellow went back to his house, brought him a piece. Scientist or the geologist went back to his lab, analyzed it. And he came back to the friend that he borrowed it from or gotten it from and said, "There are pieces of bone and shell and seed fragments in that." He says, "What you've got is dinosaur poo."
For goodness sake.
And so I have a ball with the kids on this one, and I've got samples. I'll test them and say, "What do you think this is?" and everything. But anyway, I talked to them about that, and I said, "How would you like to go around wearing your polished dinosaur poo?" And they go, So I have polished pieces, a fair collection of dinosaur poo. It's called coprolite in the paleontology term. All right, and that one would be really pretty red and probably have some banding, and I guarantee it would have the little bone fragments and the little seed shells and things like that that are not digested completely. Very, very, very intriguing. Well, I know all of you have grandkids, right? Well, I'm going to share with you one of the big scientific things that has occurred and really rocked modern science today. And I was aware of this. And this book tells a story, and you can share it with them. Guess what we're finding more and more of in dinosaur bone? Some of you may have heard of it. I'm leaving 2 sets of these for the library for kids to read. There's a green one too, and I'll leave it here. But it's a story of them finding soft tissue in the dinosaur bones. This is the eyewitness story and account. This one deals with Triceratops horn, bone cells that are still stretchy, and pieces of tissue in it. The bone is supposedly 68 million years old, but we know the tissue can't last more than 10,000 years. So we've got a major problem somewhere. And I kept telling my colleagues, I said, you're putting too much trust in this dating, and I said, there's too many guess things that are in this dating. I don't care how accurate you think it is. There's too many things that are assumptions in it. Oh, all right. And I said, now they're getting bit hard by this. And not only that, I have a green one too, and like I said, I'm going to leave a couple of these in the library here. And this one talks about now they're finding even nerve tissue, even more delicate tissue in the bones. Wow. And I just say, power to you. And you guys, come on, get your glasses off, put your thinking on, and let's get some science correct. Oh, no, and boy, there's some of them getting mad. And I said, get out of your religious rut. And they, boy, then they really look at me and everything. You're making it religious in nature. All right? Now, we've got our card, right? We handed out a card. And you've got to take one of these, too. All right? You're my kids today, okay? Just don't act like them. But anyway. Here is a specimen. Take one and pass it on. There is a fool's gold crystal for you. Some of those that I've picked up over the years. And I can't stop at that. You've got to have a pretty polished rock as well. So take one of those and pass it around.
I did. Oh, okay, you got one.
And you've got to go home, you've got a square crystal, natural crystal, iron particles, though you've got to have a hexagonal quartz crystal too. The only problem is these are all from Arkansas. My apologies. But anyway, okay. Some people, Arkansas, okay. Some people, okay. So take one, pass it around. You have grandkids? Good little birthday thing for them. And they're going to ask you, where'd you get that? How that and like this? You watch the curiosity it builds, just like with me, as I'm stuffing my pocket all the time. All right, with this. I guess I made a pretty good science, good material for a science teacher. Between telling stories and putting it all together and digging it out and collecting and everything. And that's why I've been able to last almost 40 years.
Where did your rocks come from?
There are various places. There's Africa, several Africa. There's Wyoming. There's Brazil, South America.
What are the blues? This is not familiar.
Yeah, that one is African lace agate, blue agate. But there's African, South American, some U.S. stuff in there.
Is this tiger's eye?
That's tiger's eye. Is that the red one or the yellow?
Yellow.
Yeah, that one's yellow. There's also the red you can see in there.
This is red.
Yeah.
So take you one, and all I can say is, come join us. Bring your family down, and just see what we have. You can just walk around, don't have to have me yak at you at all. Just walk around and look. I have people tell me all the time, you have got the best mineral collection in the state. Well, I came out of a state that had lots of minerals. That's why. All right, and I've been collecting for a long time. So the square one is pyrite cube. All right, and fool's gold, and these are, that one is actually hematite, is actually magnetic. Yeah, it's iron, a polished iron gemstone. And you got Africa, you got South America, Wyoming, and then the Arkansas quartz crystals.
Yeah, I think so.
And with that, I conclude and say, come, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry I was a little late. The geologist who never gets lost.
It happened.